Weller is the most popular wheated bourbon on the planet, at least as far as I'm concerned. One of my favorites, and the thing that got me into bourbon to start with, is Weller Antique 107. It's one of those bottles I discovered early. Like when I really started going down the rabbit hole, this was probably 10th, 15th bottle that I was able to pick up. One of the first rare allocated bottles I was able to get. And from then on, this is just mama's cooking. Like this is what wheated bourbons are supposed to taste like, really what bourbons are supposed to taste like according to my palate. I don't see Weller as much as I used to. I can usually keep a Special Reserve and a 107 on stock here with as much as we bourbon hunt, but the rest of these, man, we really gotta nurse them if we wanna keep them on the shelf. Now, hopefully, supply and demand corrects that at some point, and these are just sitting on store shelves and you'll be able to pick one up. I get asked, because these are so difficult to find, what's the best alternative to a Weller product? Well, obviously that's gonna depend which one you're talking about. You're talking about a full proof, a 107, a 90 proof. So what I thought I could do is just grab every single wheated bourbon I have on the shelf, get it down, let's compare it, see how it stacks up to Weller. I'm gonna keep me a glass of Antique 107 out here just in case we need to go back and compare it to any of these bottles we're gonna talk about. But first, let's learn a little bit more about wheated bourbons. Your traditional bourbon mash bill is going to be a rye mash bill. Now that means they use at least 51% corn, they use a little bit of rye, and then they're gonna use some malted barley. But realistically, all you've gotta have is that 51% corn, and you can fill out the rest of your mash bill with any cereal grain you wanna use. And we're starting to see a lot of people use heirloom grains and experiment with different things. But back in the day, somebody had the wise idea of giving wheat a try. Now with wheat, what they found is that you got less of that rye spiciness, so it was a little easier on the palate, and you got a little more sweetness on the flavor as well. And that's exactly what you get here with Weller. Like you smell it, and for me, it is just a caramel underbase, a little bit of oak up front, and then just bursts of bright red fruit. And on the palate, it's pretty much that. Maybe in a little different order. That oak comes through in the mid palate. It leaves like that nice red fruit finish. A very subtly complex bourbon for me. And it just fits my taste. One of the reasons I love it so much. But I don't think there's anything on the market that is a real close comparison to this. But we're gonna try them all, and I'm gonna tell you how they stack up. So let's get started. Now the first one we're gonna try is the obvious, right? Like the old Fitzgerald, Heaven Hill, wheated mash bill, the decanter bottles. This is a 17-year-old one because I don't have a younger one open right now on the shelf. So this is gonna be a lot oakier, a lot different than the Weller products. But this is probably, at least the younger ones of these, the closest comparison I can get in that it's got that nice oak, it's got a little bit of red fruit. Heaven Hill stuff tends to be a little lighter and a little brighter. The oak comes through a little more chalky on the palate. Definitely better than the Antique 107, but like give me a break. That's a 17-year-old decanter bottle that goes for God knows how much at this point on the secondary market. Some of these I've had have actually been really funky and off profile and weird. So not every one of these I think is a fair comparison to the Weller stuff. This one is that elevated. Like it's a much more complex whiskey with a lot more going on with those extra years on it. Some of the younger versions of this, probably a closer comparison, but I mean, heck, these are usually harder to get than Weller stuff. So what's the purpose in comparing something that's even harder to find? I think a more fair comparison is going to be our old Fitzgerald 80 proof bottom shelfer here. Now, I don't think this thing is necessarily in every state. I don't know if they sell it in Alabama, but I have seen it around quite a bit. And this is just the low end version of that guy right there. Obviously, this being a bottom shelf bottle, I don't even know what this costs. It's next to nothing for a bottle of whiskey, but a much younger 80 proof product, probably a fair comparison for Weller Special Reserve. A little dustier, definitely doesn't have the fruitiness of a Weller. A decent cheap whiskey, but there's no real complexity going on with that. Like there's nothing super interesting. If you just want a good sipper and you like just a little hints of that soft, dry oakiness, pretty good. But like, this is not special. That's special, not special enough for me to make that a fair comparison to even Weller Special Reserve. Hey, we're doing something really cool and I want to make sure y'all are aware of it. You can join us in Jackson, Mississippi for our second distillery takeover at Cathead Distillery on April 4th. They'll be pouring Old Soul bourbon samples, there'll be a special cocktail menu, and you can come hang out with me and the rest of the Brewzle team. And one of the most interesting and unique things there is the barrel pick opportunity. While samples last, the first ticket holders through the gate will be able to take part in picking Old Soul's first ever wheat whiskey single barrel. And it'll be available for purchase that same night. We'll pick it early in the night. They'll literally bottle it up. You can buy it and take it home that night. Tickets are $40, but that includes a Glencairn, samples that'll be poured at the event, and while supplies last, access to participate in that barrel pick and to purchase the bottle at the end of the night. And then the next day, you could come hang out with us at Spillway Wine and Spirits to potentially win some rare bottles at their annual lottery. I'm actually gonna have the whole Brewzle team enter these raffles, buy every bottle we can get our hands on, and then give those away at the end of the event. Get tickets to the Cathead Takeover through the link in the description and the pinned comment. Come join us, hang out. It's gonna be a good time. This next one is a bottle I just got. I literally haven't even opened this bottle to give it a try, and I suck at opening things. I've gotten smarter. I've started carrying a knife with me here. A little spider coat here helps out a lot. All right, Penelope Wheated. Now this would be along the lines of major producer, like this is MGP stuff these days, and they've got broad distribution, but I think this is something they've just started rolling out, so it might not be everywhere yet. But this was a super cheap bottle. I think this was $20-something. And again, it's like 95 proof, so probably a more fair comparison for a Weller Special Reserve. It's gonna be younger. You see how light and thin it is. I've gotta dig a little more for the fruit forwardness. It's there. I get a little more like orange peel on MGP stuff and a little less red fruit. This one's trying though. For the price, a really nice bottle of whiskey. Like that's getting close to that Special Reserve level of deliciousness, although a different experience. It is more caramel citrus vibes than caramel red fruit. So a little lighter, a little brighter. You might like that better if you prefer those citrus notes over the red fruit like I'm a fan of. So overall, really good. I do suggest you go out and buy this bottle when you find it, but is it a Weller alternative? A little different experience for me. I want those red fruit notes. That's what I like so much about Weller, and this just doesn't deliver that. But overall, on its own, this is a really nice, cheap bottle and a sign of what the acquisition of Penelope by MGP has allowed them to do. They can take some of their younger inventory, they can flood it into the market at prices that most of these small producers can't compete with. So good job by Penelope on the wheated, different experience than this. Next, I want to jump into some craft, and we've got quite a few craft ones here. This is Southern Star from Southern Distilling. We're gonna be doing some work with Southern Distilling, recently featured them on the channel, and we're gonna be using some of their distillate for our own brand. And this is their Wheated Paragon. This one is a bottled in bond, so this is 100 proof, which is gonna be getting up there close in that range of that 107, and that smells really nice. Not as red fruit, a little more oak, graham cracker, caramel, and that's what it delivers. Like, not the most complex whiskey in the world. Really good though. I really like this for a craft. I mean, can you even call them craft? They've got a really nice facility. They produce a lot of whiskey. They don't produce a lot of it under their own brands. Really nice whiskey, especially if you consider that craft. It's not mainstream Kentucky, just not as complex as I get here. Like this bottle right here gives me all sorts of different flavors while I'm going through it. This one's good, but it's all kind of, you know, monotone good, right? It is just kind of that caramel graham cracker, a little bit of sweetness, extra sweetness, but not really a lot of extra fruit flavors. Again, a good bottle, but it doesn't live up to the complexity that I'm gonna get on something like this, which is what we're missing on all the ones we've tried so far, other than the super rare and hard to find Old Fit 17. But I think that's what makes Weller so sought after and so special, is that if you're like really into whiskey, you're gonna like this. If you're kinda into whiskey, you're gonna like this. Like there's nothing there that is really off-putting to the majority of consumers. There's always that one guy, okay? If you're that one guy, let me know down in the comments. If you've had Antique 107 and you can handle the 107 proof, but you don't like it, I would like to know your review, your thoughts on it. But for most people, it's that quintessential Kentucky wheated bourbon, but it's also really complex. There's a lot of subtlety, and that's why I prefer this over the full proof, the higher proof. Normally I'm a proof guy, but I find a lot more complexity on the 107 versus the full proof product. Now the Special Reserve, not that complex, but for a 90 proof, it bats above its weight class. So let's move on to the next one. Probably the obvious choice. I mean, Maker's Mark is a wheated bourbon. It's in pretty much every store everywhere. Now this is the cask strength because I don't have a normal, whatever, 80, 90 proof Maker's Mark sitting around. Don't keep those on the shelf because we don't go through them. I like some of the limited releases, but I haven't been just the biggest Maker's Mark fan. That's 110 proof, so a little higher than our Antique 107 here. It's good. It gives me a little bit of that red fruit, but there's just a bit of earthiness to it that I think a lot of people will not enjoy. And you get that on a lot of craft whiskey. You don't get that earthiness on a ton of just like mainstream Kentucky producers. Like I like a lot of what's there. I don't know how to describe that flavor other than earthy. Like it's some sort of harsh, almost vegetal note, which I find vegetal a really dumb way of describing it. There's just something there I don't like. And if that thing wasn't there, I think this would be the best comparison. Maybe not as robust and complex as the Weller, but the flavor profile would actually be fairly similar. But it does have that. And the more you drink, the more your palate acclimates to that and it starts to go away. So like on that sip, which was the third sip I think on this, not as strong, still not as interesting to me. Now some of Maker's limited release stuff doesn't necessarily have those notes, or at least they're not as strong. And those are great Weller comparisons, but this is a more expensive, even harder to find bottle, so there's no use in comparing that. And that earthiness is still there a little bit. It's not as strong on the palate though. Like this is the first release of this Maker's cellar aged. Like that's a good whiskey right there. That kind of earthy notes is blended in a little better. It's not as vegetal. It comes across a little more like oaky barrel char. Really, really nice job on this release. But that's more like you just get well. If you're trying to find that, just get a Weller because it's gonna be easier and cheaper. If you're talking about something that you can actually go obtain, I think there's some other options that are better than this. All right, back to what is now a mainstream Kentucky producer. I mean, they might be a little Johnny come lately here, but they've got a great operation and they make a great whiskey. This one I'm expecting, it's been a while since I've actually had this one, so I don't recall exactly what it tastes like other than I enjoyed it when I tried it. Now this is 106 proof. I'm expecting this to be kind of like that Penelope, maybe not as complex, but better because it's got the extra proof points. That's what I'm expecting from memory, but Bardstown can sometimes surprise you. I gotta chew on that one for a minute. That's a really nice whiskey. Like outside of the Antique and the Old Fitz, that's probably the best one I've tried thus far in this video, but it's a different expression than that. I like it though, because it's robust, it's complex, it has the proof to hold up at that 106 proof points. It's not red fruit forward. It's sweet, it's a little more like honey, like honeycomb maybe. There's a little fruitiness there. I would again say it's probably leaning a little more orange peel, which is what I was talking about with that Penelope. This one leans a little more orange peel and honeycomb. Really nice bottle though. I don't remember the price on this. I also think this one was moderately affordable and available, but this Bardstown Origin Wheated is the closest alternative, although a completely different expression. As far as like enjoyability of drinking, this is the closest to this one thus far. And the next one I have here is King's Family Distillery Wheated. This is distilled by MGP. It is bottled by King's Family Distillery. It is 111 proof. So it's gonna be similar. Maybe the same mash bill, maybe a slightly different mash bill. Who knows, to that Penelope Wheated, but it's going to be higher proof, so it stacks up a little better flavor-wise to our Antique 107 right here. Yeah, see, that's much better than the Penelope Wheated. Even though I like the Penelope Wheated, I want that extra intensity of flavor that I'm gonna get with a little higher proof. 111's not bad. Like, I would love to see it at 105, 106, 107 if it's really gonna stack up. It does have a little bit of what I'll call a wheated funk to it. And you'll see a lot of people that use wheat, especially craft distilleries, they get this weird kind of funky earthiness to it. It's not bad though. It is a little doughy. It's like, that's part of that wheated funk. It tastes like citrus with a little doughiness on it. It's actually really pleasant. I like it. It's not one I would go back to over and over and over again like that Bardstown, but overall, pretty good MGP. And next is Driftless Glen Wheated. This one's distilled up in Wisconsin, I think. I think that's maybe how you're supposed to actually say it in Wisconsin. Now, I'm pretty sure this is all their own distillate, and this is definitely craft funkiness. I'm getting more into craft whiskey. I like craft whiskey in general, but I want my craft whiskey to be Kentucky level. And I'm starting to get a little more into the weird funkiness of some craft whiskey. And this is unapologetically craft. It tastes better than it smells, actually. I need to go back to that. That's actually pretty good. It's citrus. There's a little bit of maybe clove, maybe all the way through it, like mid-palate through the finish. It doesn't have as much funkiness as the nose had on it. It is just citrus and clove. Overall, that's not bad. It's a completely different thing than this. This right here is probably fairly particular. You gotta kind of be into craft whiskey. This is one I would recommend you try somewhere before you buy it, because it may or may not be for your palate. It's not like if you see this, just buy it. If it's a reasonable price, just grab it. This guy, I find it interesting, but also this is a single barrel, and so the next barrel may be a little different. Like, you never can tell with single barrels, especially from craft brands. So I like it. This is really interesting. Good whiskey. Might not be for everybody. This one is Crittenden's down in Kiln, Mississippi. He doesn't advertise it, but this is a wheated bourbon. And I might have missed some wheateds. If they don't say it, or I'm not aware of it, I probably missed it. And just like this, I just grabbed it because I know this is a wheated bourbon. And this is his bottled in bond. I think he might have added some help, but for pretty much one guy making whiskey in Mississippi, he does a fantastic job. We're at that point of the video where I've consumed copious amounts of bourbon, but that is so much better than I remember it being. Now, the problem here is that this is craft. This is sold almost exclusively in Mississippi, maybe a little bit in Alabama, maybe a little bit in Louisiana, and it's gonna be really, really hard for you to get. It's a bottle and bond, so it's 100 proof. And I've sent some to people and they're like, okay, that's a little craft. But what I'm trying right there in that bottle, that batch and that bottle, dude, if you handed that to me, I would say that's an expensive freaking bottle. I gotta get back to Crittenden's. We gotta do more barrel picks. All right, Matt Crittenden, you got me. You got me here. It's a little different experience, but it is red fruit. There's soft red fruit undertones, a little bit of chalkiness. It's really soft and subtle, like in a pleasant way, not in a negative way. It's not like a drying chalkiness. It's like the flavors are kind of soft, right? And it resonates with the oak really well. I don't want to oversell a small craft brand, I really don't. And I know this is probably not for everybody. There's a lot of people I've given this to, they're like, yeah, that's fine. And honestly, a lot of the bottles I've had, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But that one right there, like whatever he did on this batch, this is better than the batch I had opened previously. Outside of maybe this Weller Antique 107, the Old Fit 17, this is my favorite. The nose has a little bit of funkiness to it. Probably has something to do with my palate acclimating to all the funk with all the other bottles. I'm assuming I'm gonna come back to that tomorrow and have a little more funkiness on the palate. But once you get acclimated to that funk, which I'm assuming is there, it may not even be, that's a really nice bottle of whiskey. And the next one is, I don't even know how to categorize this. Small producer, fairly big distribution, but this is a limited release from them. Now, this is distilled in a bunch of different states, so it's a blend of a lot of different wheated whiskeys. This is the Redwood Empire Screaming Titan Wheated Bourbon. And I just bought this bottle. We popped it open and tried it that day. I don't really recall exactly what it tastes like, so we're about to go to it right now. Now, I think this is 30% wheat. They make it really difficult to actually read the proof on this one. I think it's 80 something proof or so. That's good whiskey. It definitely has a little bit of a doughiness to it. It's got a little bit of those red fruit notes I'm looking for. That doughiness throws it off a little bit. Overall, on its own, by itself, I like this product a lot. I don't think it compares to Weller Antique though, or even the Special Reserve. And the next one is jumping back to Heaven Hill. So for those that don't know, The Old Fitz we tried earlier, the Old Fitzgerald Decanter Series, the more low-end Old Fitz, those are made by Heaven Hill. Also, Larceny, made by Heaven Hill. I believe they're a completely different mash bill. I say completely different. There's a different amount of wheat in them. And I think for my palate, the Old Fitz stuff is probably a little more in line with the Weller flavor profile. You get a little more red fruit on those. And most of the time for me, the Larcenys are much more caramel forward. And that's what I get here. It is much more caramel, a little bit of a nuttiness on this one. I don't see that on Larceny a whole bunch. Really nice bottle. Like, this is a really good weeder. As far as like weeders that are regularly available that you could probably go pick up, this might be the best regularly available wheated bourbon on the market. But it's not even close to the Weller stuff. Like, it's different, it's wheated, you can get it, but it's a completely different flavor profile than any of the Weller products. And the next is Ben Holiday. Ben Holiday's not what I would call craft. I mean, they're craft-ish. They are a fairly small producer, but they're owned by McCormick, and that allows them to do it right from the beginning. Like, there was no compromise. They fired it up, they had all the right setup, they did everything right from the beginning, and so they came out of the gate with a great whiskey. Their bourbon is fantastic. This is their soft red wheat. I think what I've got here is a single barrel, so this is gonna be cask strength soft red wheat at 128 proof. I had some bondeds. I tried to grab a bonded for this because I thought that was a more fair comparison. They all got drank. Like, every time I have Ben Holiday here, they just get gone. They get drank. People come over, they drink them. These are fantastic mixed with Coke, especially the bonded. Like, they're just so good. If we run out of Jack Daniels, Jill is mixing this, almost guaranteed. So we go through those a little bit. A little more honey, graham cracker. Most of the time on these wheateds, I'm gonna get red fruit. This is probably one of the more red fruit wheateds most of the time. My palate right now is not picking up a lot of red fruit on this one, but this is a single barrel. That's why I think having the bonded is better, because I've got a blend and that red fruit comes through a little more than it does right here on this single barrel. So this was a barrel that was actually picked when we went out to Ben Holiday for an influencer event, and it's really good, but it's a little off profile for my palate. So probably not the best comparison, but usually their bonded is probably about as close as I can get to a Weller Antique. It's not the same. It's not like, hey, this is just subtly different. It's a whole different expression, but it has some of that red fruit. It has some of that oakiness. These things are probably similarly aged. I don't know exactly what a Weller Antique is aged to. I would assume it's 7-8 years. You can get some of these Holidays now that are 8 years old. I think a lot of their stuff is like 6 or 7. And so not that different on aging. 100 proof Ben Holiday, 107 proof here. It's pretty close. Hopefully we've given you a lot of wheated bourbons to try. Like, that's really what we're trying to do here. It's not all about the mainstream producer stuff, but the highlights for me here, if I had to pick some, Ben Holiday soft red wheat, fantastic. Single barrels, like, they can be all over the place. Try the bonded, soft red wheat or bourbon. Both of those are good. This one tends to have a little more red fruit for my palate normally. Larceny barrel proof is good. Much more caramel graham cracker than red fruit. Some of the craft stuff's really good. The Crittenden's Bottle and Bond, dude, might have been one of the better bottles I tried today. And maybe my palate's just missing some of the craft funkiness, but for some reason or another, I like that Crittenden's Bottle and Bond a lot. And that batch I happened to open tonight, really, really good. So you've got a lot of wheated options. I don't feel like I helped narrow it down at all. I feel like I just made it even cloudier. What it boils down to is that when you've got magic, like Buffalo Trace has with their wheated product, it's really hard to find an alternative. Like, there's not really an alternative to that if you want that expression. And that's the case with any whiskey. Hopefully we've done a good job of putting you on to some wheated bourbons that you could try, that you would also like. Appreciate y'all watching all the way to the end. We'll see you in the next one.